So long as you're within the speed limit and you're a good driver, we shouldn't have too much of a difficulty with that. Right, Itana? It's a good time now for you to set your watches and your clocks. Look at it. It's exactly 9 o'clock. Tuesday morning coming down. Top of the morning until 10. We're into the final hour of the program right now, and the preceding hour was brought to you courtesy of Law Insurance Brokers. Call them on 876-968-1100. Law Insurance Brokers, one call for all insurance. So today's nomination day. Activities will get underway around about 10 o'clock, another hour or so from now. And elections are coming up on the 3rd of September. Country will be voting in the general elections. Well, in this educational segment, we'll look at what the election labor law states about voting on election day for both employers and employees. Our guest to speak on this topic is noted attorney at law and partner at Duncox Attorneys at Law, Jonathan Morgan, who's our guest on the telephone. Good morning, Mr. Morgan. How are you today?
Good morning, Richie. I'm doing well.
All right. So glad that you could join us. It seems to me, based on my information, that Duncox Attorneys at Law actually place a lot of emphasis on labor law. You have a section pretty much geared to that. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Our firm's labor team comprises of 3 partners and 2 associates, and we are led by the current president of the Jamaica Bar Association, Mr. Emil Leiber.
Ah, and there's enough to keep them busy, isn't there?
There really is. We've been keeping quite busy during the coronavirus season, in particular, advising companies on remote work policies, layoff strategies, and a number of things that the companies have found relevant during this time.
So let's zero in on some of these matters relating to the obligations of the employer and the employee. First of all, according to the election labor laws, what's the period of time allotted for employees to cast their vote?
Well, the labor laws in Jamaica require that employers permit their employees to be absent from work for at least 3 hours on election day. And this 3-hour window is in addition to the normal lunch hour. So the employer cannot expect that the employee would utilize that lunch hour for the purpose of voting. Now, what is important is also noting that the requirement to give this window does not apply if the employee commences working after 10 a.m. on the morning of election day or concludes working before 2 p.m. on polling day. Presumably the option to vote can be exercised in the morning if you begin working at or after 10, or it can be exercised in the afternoon if you end working before 2 p.m. So the period is allowed only for those employees who begin working before 10 and continue working after 2.
Okay. And if that person gets into work after 10 and works until after 2, any difference there?
Right. So if they get in after 10 but work until after 2, the rule will not apply because they can cast their voting in the morning before heading into work. So they are not to be given that 3-hour window if they get in after 10 a.m.
Okay.
We've been getting a number of questions, however, about the consequence of COVID-19 on this time to vote question. Ultimately, a number of employees are working from home. So employers are quite rightfully concerned about being required to give them 3 hours away from work when they are not physically at the office. But our take is that even remote workers should not be expected to be performing the employer's duties for the entire day on election day. They really should be afforded the opportunity to take a 3-hour break, even if working from home, to facilitate voting.
To the best of your knowledge, what times do the polling stations actually usually open?
I don't know myself. Right, I assume they open from very early.
Like before 9 o'clock, possibly.
Yes, I would expect.
Yes. Now, can an employee take time off from work on election day and then choose not to vote? And what might the consequences be?
In theory, yes, they can. The regulations that provide for the time off from working simply say that the employer has to permit the employee to be absent for 3 hours on polling day. It does not say that the employee must use that time to vote. So this is a matter that a number of companies may also be concerned with. So voting, in my estimation, it's simply a personal constitutional right, and the employee may choose not to exercise it. And that choice may be exercised whether or not they were given this time away from work. So practically speaking, the companies should consider scheduling the time off window to minimize the hit on its productivity, considering that it may be exercised by everyone who can exercise it.
Yes.
And I would recommend that they take 2 steps to do that. The first is checking the EOJ's website to confirm that their employee pool is registered to vote. This is done by visiting EOJ's site and entering the employee's name and date of birth on the Query the Voters List page.
Okay.
And then second, once you've identified which employees are registered to vote, you can break up the workforce into groups and assign time windows for each group to be absent. This measure should ensure that the company is not left with an empty office for a large part of the day, for example, or that the productivity levels are minimized by sorting the group in a way that only duplicated employees are out on certain days, so that the core functions can still be performed during the time when other employees are still in office. So we recommend those steps be taken, and of course it follows from these steps that only those who are registered to vote should really be afforded that 3-hour window. Whether or not they actually choose to vote during that window is a matter for the employee.
Okay, that's an interesting point there. Very, very interesting. So that information can be had if the employee decides to check the website and the employee's name does not appear. Then what shall the employer advise the employee in such a circumstance?
So it's my understanding that the list is updated regularly. If the employee's name does not appear, it's a suggestion that that employee is not entitled to vote at the election coming up. And in that case, the employer may notify the employee that they are not afforded a 3-hour window on polling day that the other employees may be afforded.
Okay. All right. Now, in the situation where an employee wants to volunteer to work with the ECJ, the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, on election day, how should that individual then go about requesting that time off from work?
Yeah, we know that many of our employers are jealous mistresses, so it's not likely that employees will be given the day to go work at election freely. Of course, honest employees are also unable to take sick leave or compassionate leave to facilitate volunteering on election day. So it leaves the option of taking vacation leave or taking no pay leave to attend to vote. So in a practical sense, I would recommend that employees approach their supervisors to request the day first, and if it is not given freely, then they apply for it as part of vacation leave. With the current quarantine measures in place, I think many of us have accumulated vacation leave that can be applied for that purpose.
Yes. If you just joined us, we're speaking here with attorney at law Jonathan Morgan he's a partner at Duncox Attorneys at Law, and we're looking at election day and the obligations of the employer and the employee rights. Now, Jonathan, what are the consequences for an employer who fails to provide time off work for an employee to vote or volunteer their services on election day?
Well, dealing first with the employee's right to vote, the law does not provide a specific sanction for failing to provide that 3-hour window that we described earlier for the employees to vote. Now, we do note, however, that the right to vote is a constitutional right. And if an employer does not provide the time off to work, the employee may be able to argue or to make a case that the employer has interfered with his or her constitutional right. It goes without saying that an employer would not want to be on the receiving end of that type of lawsuit. I mean, a constitutional lawsuit may result in a requirement to pay damages, and damages is a sum of money paid to someone who has filed a lawsuit. And damages in this case would not be aimed at compensation, but it may be aimed at discouraging the company or the employer from interfering with constitutional rights in the future. Another consequence, of course, would be bad publicity. In a society like ours that is very politically charged, you don't want to be the company that is seen to be denying your employees the right to vote. I don't think that's
Yes.
a favorable image.
Certainly not. Could you tell us about the law concerning pay deduction or penalties due to absence?
Well, we started by pointing out that employees are permitted 3 hours during the election day
Yes.
to be absent from work. During that period, the employee should continue to receive their regular pay. The pay should not be deducted in any form. That is a paid hour. That's a paid period of absence. If an employee takes any additional time from work, whether that time has not been approved by the company or whether it was not part of the employee's vacation leave, then those employees may be penalized for taking that additional time.
Mm-hmm.
So for hourly workers, we know that hourly workers are paid by the hour and for the number of hours that they worked. Those employees may not be paid for any additional hours that were taken during that day.
Okay.
On the other hand, though, for salaried workers, those who receive a fixed sum, whether it is quarterly or monthly,
Mm-hmm.
those employees, the employer who has engaged these salaried workers cannot deduct their salaries for any additional hours worked unless the employment document permits that deduction.
Okay.
So it's not that straightforward. It depends really on the nature of the work time and the nature of the salary entitlement of the employee.
Okay. By extension, the nature of the contract.
Certainly.
Yes. My final question to you this morning is, what does the law indicate about an employee expressing their political views at work and conducting political activities whilst at work?
Right. Yeah, we know many of our green-blooded or orange-blooded colleagues can get very passionate around this time.
Yes.
When we start hearing about their powers and showers, the law does not exactly prohibit or curtail that type of activity at work. You know, employees, generally speaking, have a right to express their constitutional views, whether it is their freedom of thought and political opinion, whether it is their freedom of expression. These constitutional rights may be expressed even at the workplace. So the question is ultimately, does the specific employer have a policy against any type of activity, or does the employee's conduct cause any form of violation of the employer's manual or the employer's rules? So if the employee's conduct causes a nuisance, for example, or if it interferes with the work of other employees, or if it amounts to harassment in the workplace, it certainly will be restricted.
Should such a policy be distributed, whether by way of a memo or some kind of document, so that all employees understand clearly?
Oh, definitely. And it's expected that if there is a policy prohibiting something as broad as political expression, it should be in the employment manual. Mm-hmm. And it is proper practice for the employees to review and sign the manual, indicating their acceptance of its terms.
All right, Jonathan, we're out of time, but I would really want to thank you for this very informative discussion that we've had. You made it very, very clear in how you've actually deliberated, and we thank you for the information that you shared, and we wish you a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie. It's been a pleasure.
All right, take care. That's, of course, Jonathan Morgan, ladies and gentlemen, an attorney at law and partner at Duncock's Attorneys at Law. And he helped us to dissect and to go through the whole matter of election day procedures as it relates to the obligations of the employer and the employee rights as well. I really want to thank Jonathan Morgan for helping us out with that this morning. I hope you found it to be useful as well. It's 14 now past the hour of 9 o'clock.